Hello everyone! I hope you're ready for another adventure, because today Wayne continues to read Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Always remember that as we go through today's story and read today's outstanding adventure, all you have to do is press the CC button in your YouTube link to be able to follow along with the words. Now I think that North Star will be perfect to join us for today's adventure. Now that North Star is here, let's jump in. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Chapter 7, Mudblood and Murmurs. Harry spent a lot of time over the next few days dodging out of sight whenever he saw Gilderoy Lockhart coming down the corridor. Harder to avoid was Colin Creevey, who seemed to almost mesmerize Harry's schedule. Nothing seemed to give Colin a bigger thrill than to say, "All right, Harry, 6 or 7 times a day," or hear, "Hello, Colin," back, however exasperated Harry sounded when he said it. Hedwig was still angry with Harry about the disastrous car journey, and Ron's wand was still malfunctioning, surpassing itself on Friday morning by shooting out of Ron's hand in charms and hitting tiny old Professor Flitwick squarely between the eyes, creating a large throbbing green boil where it had struck. So with one thing and another, Harry was quite glad to reach the weekend. He, Ron, and Hermione were planning on visiting Hagrid on Saturday morning. Harry, however, was shaken awake several hours earlier than he would have liked to be by Oliver Wood, captain of Gryffindor Quidditch team. "What's the matter?" said Harry groggily. "Quidditch practice," said Wood. "Come on." Harry squinted at the window. There was a thin mist hanging across the pink and gold sky. Now he was awake, he couldn't understand how he could have slept through the racket the birds were making. "Oliver," Harry croaked, "it's the crack of dawn." "Exactly," said Wood. He was tall and burly 6-year, and at the moment his eyes were gleaming with crazed enthusiasm. "It's all part of our new training program. Come on, grab your broom and let's go," said Wood heartily. "None of the other teams have started training yet. We're going to be the first off the mark this year." Yawning and shivering slightly, Harry climbed out of bed and tried to find his Quidditch robes. "Good man," said Wood. "Meet you on the field in 15 minutes. When he'd found his scarlet team robes, he'd pulled his cloak for warmth. Harry scribbled a note to Ron explaining where he had gone, and went down the spiral staircase to the common room with his Nimbus 2000 on his shoulder. He had just reached the portrait hole when he was clattering behind him as Colin Creevey came dashing down the spiral staircase, his camera swinging madly around his neck and something clutched in his hand. "I've heard someone saying your name on the stairs. Harry, look what I've got here. I had it developed. I wanted to show you." Harry looked bemusingly at the photograph Colin was brandishing under his nose. A moving black and white Lockhart was tugging on an arm Harry recognized as his own. He was pleased to see that his photograph was putting up a good fight and refusing to be dragged into view. As Harry watched, Lockhart gave up, slumped and panting against the edge of the picture. "Will you sign it?" said Colin eagerly. "No," Harry said flatly, glancing around him to check that the room was deserted. "Sorry, Colin, I'm in a bit of a hurry. Quidditch practice." He climbed through the portrait hole. "Oh wow, wait for me. I've never seen a Quidditch game before." Colin scrambled through the hole behind him. "It'll be really boring," Harry said quickly, but Colin ignored him, his face shining with excitement. "You were the youngest house player in 100 years, weren't you, Harry?" "Weren't you?" said Colin, trotting beside him. "You must be brilliant. I've never flown. Is it easy? Is that your own broom? Is it the best there is?" Harry didn't know how to get rid of him. It was like having an extremely talkative shadow. "I don't really understand Quidditch," said Colin breathlessly. "Is it true that there are 4 balls, and 2 of them flying around trying to knock people off their broom?" "Yes," said Harry heavily, resigned to explaining the complicated rules of Quidditch. "They're called bludgers. There are 2 beaters on each team who carry clubs who beat the bludgers away from their own side. Fred and George Weasley are the 2 Gryffindor beaters." "And what are the other balls for?" Colin asked, tripping down a couple of steps because he was glazing open-mouthed at Harry. "Well, the quaffle, that's the biggest red one, is the one that scores the goals. 3 chasers on each team throw the quaffle to each other and try to get it into the pitch. There are 3 long poles with hoops on the end. And the 4th ball? The golden snitch," said Harry. "It's very small and very fast and difficult to catch. But that's what the seeker's got to do, because the game of Quidditch doesn't end until the snitch has been caught. And whichever team's seeker catches the snitch earns his team an extra 150 points. And you're the Gryffindor seeker, aren't you?" said Colin in awe. "Yes," said Harry, as they left the castle and started across the dew-drenched grass. "And there's the keeper, too. He guards the goalposts. That's it, really." But Colin didn't stop questioning Harry all the way down the sloping lawns to the Quidditch field, and Harry only shook him off when he reached the changing rooms. Colin called after him in a piping voice, "I'll go and have a seat, Harry," and huffled off to the stands. The rest of the Gryffindor team were already in the changing room. Wood was the only person who looked truly awake. Fred and George Weasley were sitting puffy-eyed and trousled-haired next to a fourth-year, Alicia Spinett, who seemed to be nodding off on the wall behind her. Her fellow chasers, Katie Bell and Angela Johnson, were yawning side by side opposite them. "There you are, Harry. What kept you?" said Wood briskly. "Now I wanted a quick talk with all of you before we actually get onto the field, because I spent the summer devising a whole new training program, which I really think will make all the difference." Wood was holding up a large diagram of a Quidditch field on which were drawn many lines, arrows, and crosses in different colored inks. He took out his wand, tapped the board, and the arrows began to wiggle over the diagram like caterpillars. As Wood launched into a speech about his new tactics, Fred's head drooped onto Lisa's Spinett's shoulder, and he began to snore. The first board took nearly 20 minutes to explain, but there was another board under that, and a third under that. Harry sank into a stupor as Wood droned on and on. "So," said Wood at long last, jerking Harry from a wistful fantasy about what he could be eating for breakfast at this very moment up at the castle. "Is that clear? Any questions?" "I've got a question, Oliver," said George, who was woken with a start. "Why couldn't you have told us this yesterday when we were awake?" Wood wasn't pleased. "Now you listen here, you lot," he said, glowering at them. "We should have won the Quidditch Cup last year. We were easily the best team, but unfortunately, owing to circumstances beyond our control," Harry shifted guiltily in his seat. He had been unconscious in the hospital for the final match of the previous year, meaning that Gryffindor had been the players short and had suffered their worst defeat in 300 years. Wood took a moment to regain control of himself. Their last defeat was clearly still tormenting him. "So this year, we train harder than ever before, okay? Let's go out and put our new theories into practice." Wood shouted, seizing his broomstick and leading the way out of the locker room. Stiff-legged and still yawned, his team followed. They had been in the locker room for so long that the sun was completely up now, although remnants of the mist hung over the grass in the stadium. As Harry walked into the field, he saw Ron and Hermione sitting in the stands. "Aren't you finished yet?" called Ron incredulously. "Haven't even started yet," said Harry, looking jealously at the toast and marmalade Ron and Hermione had brought out in the great hall. Wood's been teaching us new moves. He mounted his broomstick and kicked off the ground, soaring up into the air. Cool morning wind whipped his face, waking far and effectively from Wood's long talk. It felt wonderful to be back on a Quidditch field. He soared right around the stadium at full speed, racing Fred and George. "What's the funny clicking noise?" called Fred as they hurtled around the corner. Harry looked into the stands. Collins was sitting in one of the highest seats, his camera raised, taking picture after picture. The sound strangely magnified in the deserted stadium. "Look this way, Harry! This way!" he cried cheerily. "Who's that?" said Fred. "No idea," Harry lied, putting on a spurt of speed that took him as far away from Colin as possible. "What's going on?" said Wood, frowning as he skimmed through the air towards them. "Why is the first year taking pictures? I don't like it. He could be a Slytherin spy trying to find out about the new training program." "He's in Gryffindor," said Harry quickly. "And the Slytherins don't need a spy," said Oliver, said George. "What makes you said that?" said Wood testily. "Because they're here in person," said George, pointing. Several people in green robes were walking onto the field, broomsticks in hand. "I don't believe it," Wood hissed in outrage. "I booked the field for today. We'll see about this." Wood shot towards the ground, landing rather harder than he had meant to in his anger, staggering slightly as he dismounted. Harry, Fred, and George followed. "Flint," Wood bellowed at the Slytherin captain. "This is our practice time. We got up specially. You can clear off." Marcus Flint was even larger than Wood. He had a look of trollish cunning on his face and replied, "Plenty of room for all of us," said Wood. Angela, Alicia, and Katie had come on over too. There were no girls in the Slytherin team, who stood shoulder to shoulder, facing the Gryffindor, leering to a man. "But I booked the field," said Wood, positively spitting. "I booked it." "Ah," said Flint, "and I've got a specially signed note from here, Professor Snape. I, Professor Snape, give the Slytherin team permission to practice today on the Quidditch field, owing to the need to train their new seeker." "You've got a new seeker," said Wood, distracted. "Where?" And from behind 6 large figures before them came a 7th, smaller boy, smirking all over his pale, pointed face. It was Draco Malfoy. "Aren't you Lucius Malfoy's son?" said Fred, looking at Malfoy with dislike. "Funny you should mention Draco's father," as the whole Slytherin team smiled still more broadly. "Let me show you the generous gift he made to Slytherin team." All 7 of them held out their broomsticks, 7 highly pointed, bright, brand new handles, in 7 sets of fine gold lettering. The words Nimbus 2001 gleamed under the Gryffindor's noses in the early morning sun. Very latest model. Only came out last month, said Flint, carelessly flicking a speck of dust from his own. I believe it outstrips the old 2000s by a considerable amount. As for the old clean sweeps, he smiled nastily at Fred and George, who were both clutching clean sweep 5s. Sweeps the board with them. None of the Gryffindor team could think of anything to say for a moment. Malfoy was smoking so broadly, his cold eyes were reduced to slits. Oh, look, said Flint. A field invasion. Ron and Hermione were crossing the grass to see what was going on. What's happening? Ron had asked Harry. Why aren't you playing? And what's he doing here? He was looking at Malfoy, taking his Slytherin Quidditch robes. I'm the new Slytherin Seeker, Weasley, said Malfoy smugly. Everyone's been admiring the brooms my father bought the team. Ron gaped open-mouthed at the 7 superb broomsticks in front of him. Good, aren't they? Said Mouth smoothly. Perhaps the Gryffindor team will be able to raise some gold and get new brooms too. You could raffle off those Clean Sleep 5s. I expect the museum would bid for them. The Slytherin team howled with laughter. At least no one on Slyffindor team needed to buy their way in, said Hermione sharply. They got in on pure talent. A smug look on Malfoy's face flickered. No one asked your opinion, you filthy mudblood, he spat. Harry knew at once what Malfoy said was something really bad because there was an instant uproar at his words. Flint had to dive in front of Malfoy to stop Fred and George from jumping on him. Alicia shrieked, How dare you! Ron plunged his hand into his robes, pulled out his wand and yelled, You will pay for that one, Malfoy. He pointed it under Flint's arms in Malfoy's face. A loud bang echoed towards the stadium, and a loud green light shot out of the wrong end of Ron's wand, hitting him in a storm, sending him reeling back into the grass. Ron, are you alright? Hermione squeaked. Ron opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he gave an almighty belch, and several slugs dripped out of his mouth onto his lap. The Slytherin team were paralyzed with laughter. Flint doubled up, hanging onto his new broomstick for support. Malfoy was on all fours, banging the ground with his fist. The Gryffindors were gathered around Ron, who kept belching large, glistening slugs. Nobody wanted to touch him. We'd better get him to Hagrid's. It's near, said Harry to Hermione, who nodded bravely, and the pair of them pulled Ron up by his arms. What happened, Harry? What happened? Is he ill? But can you cure him, can't you? Colin ran down from his seat and was now dancing alongside them as they left the field. Ron gave a huge heave, and more slugs dribbled down his front. Oh, said Colin, fascinated and raising his camera. Can you hold him still, Harry? Get out of the way, Colin, said Harry angrily. He and Hermione supported Ron out of the stadium, across the grounds near the edge of the forest. Nearly there, Ron, said Hermione, as the gamekeeper's cabin came into view. You'll be all right in a minute. Almost there. They were within 20 feet of Hagrid's house when the front door opened. It wasn't Hagrid who emerged. Gildery Lockhart, wearing robes of palest mauve today, came striding out. Quick, behind here, Harry hissed, dragging Ron behind a nearby bush. Hermione followed, somewhat reluctantly. It's a simple matter of what you're doing, Lockhart was saying loudly to Harry. If you need help, you know where I am. I'll let you have a copy of my book. I'm surprised you haven't got one already. I'll sign one tonight and send it over. Well, goodbye. And he strode away towards the castle. Harry waited till Lockhart was out of sight, then pulled Ron out of the bush and up toward Hagrid's house. They knocked on the door urgently. Hagrid appeared at once, looking grumpy, but his expression brightened when he saw who it was. Been wondering when you were coming to see me. Come in, come in. Thought you might have been Professor Lockhart again. Harry and Hermione supported Ron over the threshold into the one-room cabin, which had an enormous bed in one corner, a fire cracking merrily in the other. Hagrid didn't seem perturbed by Ron's slug problem, which Harry hastily explained as he lowered Ron into the chair. Better out than in, he said cheerfully, plucking one large copper basin in front of him. Get them all out, Ron. I don't think there's anything to do except wait for it to stop, said Hermione anxiously, watching Ron bend over the basin. That's a difficult curse to work at best of times, but with a broken wand? Hagrid was bustling around making them some tea. His boarhound Fang was slobbering over Harry. What did Lockhart want with you anyway, Hagrid? Harry asked, scratching Fang's ears. Giving me advice on getting kelpies out of the well, growled Hagrid, moving a half-plucked roster off his scribbled table and setting it down on a teapot. Like I don't know. And a banging on about some banshee he banished. If it was true, I'll eat my kettle. It was most unlike Hagrid to criticize a Hogwarts teacher, and Harry looked at him in surprise. Hermione, however, in a voice somewhat higher than usual, I think you're being a bit unfair. Professor Dumbledore obviously thought he was the best man for the job. He was the only man for the job, said Hagrid, offering them a plate of trickled fudge. One Ron coughed squelchily into the basin. And I mean only one. Getting very difficult to find one for a dark arts job. People aren't too keen to take it. They're starting to think it's jinxed. No one's lasted for a year now. So tell me, said Hagrid, jerking over to Ron. Who was he trying to curse? Malfoy called Hermione something. It must have been really bad because everyone went wild. It was bad, said Ron hoarsely, emerging over the tabletop looking pale and sweaty. Malfoy called her Mudblood, Hagrid. Ron dived out of sight again with a fresh wave of slugs made their appearance. Hagrid looked outraged. He didn't, he growled at Hermione. He did, she said, but I don't know what it means. I could tell it was very rude, of course. It's about the most insulting thing he could speak of, gasped Ron, coming back up. Mudblood's a really foul name for someone who was born a muggle. You know, non-magic parents. There are some wizards, like Malfoy's family, who think they're better than everyone else because they're what people call purebloods. He gave a small burp and a single slug fell out of his outstretched hand. He threw it into the basin and continued. I mean, the rest of us know it doesn't make any difference at all. Look at Neville Longbottom. He's pureblood and can hardly stand a cauldron the right way up. And they haven't invented a spell for Hermione can't do, said Hagrid proudly, making Hermione go so brilliant in a shade of magenta. It's a disgusting thing to call someone, said Ron, wiping his sweaty brow with a shaky hand. Dirty blood, see? Common blood. It's ridiculous. Most wizards these days are half-blood anyway. If we hadn't married muggles, we'd died out. Well, I don't blame you for trying to curse him, Ron, said Hagrid loudly over the thuds of more slugs hitting the basin. But maybe it was a good idea for your wand backfired. Suspect Lucius Malfoy would have come marching to the school if he'd cursed his son. At least you're not in trouble. Harry would have pointed out that trouble didn't come much worse than having slugs pouring out of your mouth, but he couldn't. Hagrid's treacle fudge was cemented his jaws together. Harry, said Hagrid abruptly, as though struck by a sudden thought, got a bone to pick with you. I've heard you've been giving out signed photo. How come I haven't gotten one? Furious, Harry wrenched his teeth apart. I have not been giving out signed photos, he said hotly. If Lockhart's still spreading that around. But he saw Hagrid was laughing. I'm only joking, he said, patting Harry gently on the back and sending him face into the table. I knew you really hadn't. I told Lockhart you didn't need him. You're more famous than him without even trying. Betcha he didn't like that, said Harry, sitting up and rubbing his chin. Don't think he did, said Hagrid, his eyes twinkling. Then I told him I'd never read one of his books and hadn't decided to. Trickle Fud, Ron? He said, as Ron's face appeared. No thanks, said Ron weakly. Better not risk it. Come and see what I've been growing, said Hagrid as Harry and Hermione finished the last of their tea. In the small vegetable patch behind Hagrid's house were a dozen of the largest pumpkins Harry had ever seen. Each was the size of a large boulder. Getting on well, aren't they? Said Hagrid happily. For the Halloween feast. Should be big enough by now. What have you been feeding them? Said Harry. Hagrid looked over his shoulder and then checked that no one was. Well, I've been giving them, a little bit of help. Harry noticed Hagrid's flowery pink umbrella leaning against the black wall of the cabin. Harry had reason to believe before now that this umbrella was not all that it looked. In fact, he had a strong impression that Hagrid's old school one was concealed inside it. Hagrid wasn't supposed to be using magic, and he had been expelled from Hogwarts in his 3rd year, but Harry had never found out why. Any mention of the matter, and Hagrid was clear his throat loudly and become mysteriously deaf until the subject was changed. An engorgement charm, I suppose, said Hermione halfway between disapproval and amusement. Well, you've done a good job on them. That's what your little sister said Hagrid, nodding at Ron. Met her just yesterday. Hagrid looked sideways at Harry, his beard twitching. She said she was just looking around the grounds, but I reckon she was hoping she might run into someone at my house. He winked at Harry. If you ask me, she wouldn't say no to a signed... Oh, shut up, said Harry. Ron snorted with laughter, and the ground was sprayed with slugs. Watch it, Hagrid warned, pulling Ron away from his precious pumpkins. It was nearly lunchtime, and Harry had only one bit of trickled fudge since dawn. He was keen to get back to the school to eat. They had said goodbye to Hagrid and walked back to the castle, Ron hiccuping occasionally, but only bringing up 2 very small slugs. He had barely set foot in the cool entrance when a voice rang out. There you are, Potter, Weasley. Professor McGonagall was walking towards them looking stern. You will both do your detentions this evening. What are we doing, Professor? Said Ron nervously, suppressing a burp. You will be polishing the silver in the trophy room with Mr. Phillips, said Professor McGonagall. And no magic, Weasley. Elbow grease. Ron gulped. Argus Finch, the caretaker, was loathed by every student in the school. And you, Potter, will be helping Professor Lockhart answer his fan mail, said Professor McGonagall. Oh no, Professor, can't I go do the trophy room too? Harry said desperately. Certainly not, said Professor McGonagall, raising her eyebrows. Professor Lockhart requested you particularly. 8 o'clock sharp, both of you. Ron and Harry slouched into the great hall, in states of deepest gloom, Hermione behind them, wearing a, well, you did break the school rules sort of expression. Harry didn't enjoy his shepherd's pie as much as he thought. Both he and Ron felt they had gotten a worse deal. Phil shall have me out there all night, said Ron heavily. No magic? There must be 100 cups in that room. I'm no good at muggle cleaning. I'd swap any time, said Harry hollowly. I've got loads of practice with the Dursleys. Answering Lockhart's fan mail? It'll be a nightmare. Saturday afternoon seemed to melt away. In what seemed like no time, it was 5 minutes to 8. Harry was dragging his feet along the second corridor to Lockhart's office. He gritted his teeth and knocked. The door flew open at once. Lockhart beamed at him. Ah, here's the scallywag, he said. Come in, Harry, come in. Shining brightly on the walls by the light of many candles were countless framed photographs of Lockhart. He had even signed a few of them. Another large pile lay on his desk. You can address the envelopes, Lockhart told Harry, as though this was a huge treat. This first one is Gladys Gudgeon. Bless her. Huge fan of mine. The minutes snailed by. Harry let Lockhart's voice wash over him, occasionally saying, and yeah, and right. Now and then, he caught a phrase like, fame's a fickle fiend, Harry, or celebrities as celebrity does. Remember that. The candles burned lower and lower, making the light dance over the many moving faces of Lockhart watching him. Harry moved his aching hand over what felt a 1,000th envelope, writing out Verona Smithley's address. It must be nearly time to leave, Harry thought miserably. Please, let it be nearly time. And then he heard something quite far apart from the spitting of the dying candles and Lockhart's prattle from the fans. It was a voice to chill the bone marrow, a voice of breathing, ice-cold venom. Come to me. Let me rip you. Let me tear you. Let me kill you. Harry gave a huge jump and a large lilac blot appeared on Veronica Smeatley's street. What? He said loudly. I know, said Lockhart. 6 solid months at the top of bestsellers list. Broke all records. No, said Harry frantically. That voice. Sorry, said Lockhart, looking puzzly. What voice? That voice that said, didn't you hear it? Lockhart was looking at Harry in high astonishment. What are you talking about, Harry? Perhaps you're getting a little drowsy. Great Scott, look at the time. We've been here nearly 4 hours. I never have believed it. Time flies, hasn't it? Harry didn't answer. He was straining an ear to hear the voice again. But there was no sound now except for Lockhart telling him he mustn't expect a treat like this every time he got detention. Feeling dazed, Harry left. It was so late that the Gryffindor common room was almost empty. He went straight up to the dormitory. Ron wasn't back yet. Harry pulled on his pajamas, got into bed, and waited. Half an hour later, Ron had arrived, nursing his right arm, bringing a strong smell of polish into the darkened room. My muscles have all seamed up, he groaned, sinking into bed. 14 times he made me buff that Quidditch cup before he was satisfied. And then I had another slug attack all over a special service award for the school. Took ages to get the slime off. How was it with Lockhart? Peeking his voice low as to not wake Neville and Dean and Seamus, Harry told Ron exactly what had heard. And Lockhart said he couldn't hear it, said Ron. Harry could see him frowning in the moonlight. Do you think he was lying? But I don't get it. Even someone invisible would have had to open the door. I know, said Harry, lying back on his four-poster and staring at the canopy above. I don't get it either. Oh wow, a lot just happened in today's chapter. What did you think, Northstar? I like that part too. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again. And we'll see you again here with Wayne Reads. Thank you for joining us. We can't wait to see you on another adventure. Bye-bye.